The high country chill of the Montana Territory had already settled into the bones of the mining town, promising a brutal winter. It was late October, 1874. From her small room above the Gold Nugget Saloon, Annabeth Colton watched the last of the week. Bruised light bleed out from behind the Bitterroot Mountains. The mountains were a wall, black and final, hemming in the muddy rut of a street, the crude pine coffins of the buildings, and her. She was 22 years old, and tomorrow she was to be married. Annabeth turned from the cracked window glass. In the dim lamplight, her reflection was a ghost. She saw a face too thin, with eyes too large and watchful for her age. She had a sharp mind, a mind that could calculate sums faster than the saloon keeper and read the weather in the clouds. But that mind was trapped inside a life that had left her bruised by a powerlessness so complete. It felt like a second skin. On the cot, laid out like a corpse, was the wedding dress. It was made of heavy, cream-colored satin, with lace at the throat so stiff it would scratch. It was not her dress, it was his, a purchase, a claim. Below her feet, the saloon was coming alive. The tinny thump of a piano started up, followed by a roar of male laughter. The sound was thick, suffocating. She knew his laugh, Lemuel Dre. Even when she could not see him, she felt his presence in the town. He was a wealthy man, a land baron who had bought up the best claims and grazing rights in the valley. He was also a man who saw the world as a collection of things to be owned, broken, and used. Women, to him, were property, no different from a good horse or a fertile patch of land. He was 45, perhaps older, with a thick body and hands stained by tobacco and violence. Annabeth was the settlement for her father's gambling debts. She could still smell the rye whiskey on her father's breath, see the damp desperation in his eyes as he had pushed her forward in the saloon 2 weeks prior. She is a good worker, Mr. Dre, strong. She will give you sons. Annabeth pressed her hands to her stomach. The last girl Lemuel Dre had married, a quiet girl from downriver, had been thrown from a horse within 6 months, or so it was said. Dre had bought a fine new headstone for her, and the talk had died, just as the girl had. This was not a marriage. It was an execution, and she would not go to it. She had been planning for a week, ever since she had seen the dress. She had stitched her plan together in the dark, using the same quiet, methodical patience she used to mend her father's shirts. She had saved crusts of bread. She had stolen a small, dull knife from the kitchen, and she had watched. The sounds from below grew louder, coarser. They were celebrating his wedding, her sale. Annabeth waited. She sat on the floor, her back against the rough planked wall, and let the hours crawl by. 1 hour, 2, the piano player quit. Shouts turned to low murmurs. A bottle smashed. Finally, near 3 in the morning. The heavy thud of the saloon's main door closing was followed by a profound, heavy silence. She did not move. She waited until the first hint of gray, that dead metallic light before the dawn, touched the window. Now, she stood, her joints aching from the cold. She did not look at the wedding dress. She picked it up, the satin cold and heavy in her hands. She put it on. The fabric slithered over her thin wool shift, clinging to her skin. It was a strange, terrible armor. She felt the stiff lace bite into her throat. Then she pulled her old, tattered wool cloak over it, the rough brown fabric completely hiding the cream satin. She pulled the hood low, shadowing her face. She did not bother with the door. Dre had paid for the room, and the saloon keeper had locked it from the outside. She went to the window. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was a cold, sharp energy. She pushed the ill-fitting frame open. The hinges groaned in the silence. She froze, listening. Nothing, just the sigh of the wind coming down from the pass. She climbed out, her stockinged feet finding the slanted roof of the woodshed below. The shingles were slick with frost. She slid, biting back a cry as she landed hard in the muddy alley. The impact drove the breath from her lungs. For a moment, she lay stunned, the smell of wet dirt and pine smoke filling her nose. Then she scrambled to her feet. The cold was shocking. A slap in the face. She ran, keeping to the shadows, her feet slipping in the frozen mud. Her target was the horse pen behind the saloon, not the main livery, which would have a man sleeping in the loft, but the small, rickety corral where patrons left their mounts. It was a gamble. There might be no horses, or only poor ones. She reached the fence, her heart hammered against her ribs. There were 3 horses inside, huddled against the far fence for warmth, their heads low. One looked lame. Another was a small, mottled pony. The third, however, was a tall, dark shape, standing apart, a good horse. She slipped the wooden bar on the gate, her fingers numb and clumsy. She eased the gate open, making no sound. She moved toward the tall, dark horse, whispering softly, the way she had with her father's mules. "Easy now, easy, boy." The horse raised its head. It watched her, but it did not stir. She reached for the rope halter it wore. Her fingers brushed the coarse hair of its neck. "That is not your horse." The voice was not loud, but it cut through the gray dawn like a razor. Annabeth spun around, her hand flying to the knife in her cloak pocket. He was standing not 10 feet away, leaning against the saloon's back wall as if he had been there all night. He was part of the shadows. The light was just now beginning to find him. He was lean, where Dre was thick. He was quiet, where Dre was loud. He was dressed in worn canvas trousers and a sheepskin-lined jacket, his hat pulled low. He was not one of Dre's men. She would have known. He pushed himself off the wall and took 1 step toward her. The meager light caught the side of his face. A long, puckered scar ran from the corner of his left eye, pulling the edge of his mouth into a permanent, grim line before vanishing into the collar of his jacket. He looked rugged, solitary, and dangerous in a way that was entirely different from Lemuel Dre. He looked like the mountains themselves, unforgiving and ancient. Behind him, tethered to a post, was another horse, a magnificent animal, already saddled and packed for a long journey. The horse in the pen, the one she had tried to take, was his spare. She was caught. The realization was a physical blow. This man would stop her. He would raise the alarm. Dre's men would be on her in minutes. The thought of Dre's hands on her, of his triumph, was worse than death. "Please," she whispered. The word was smoke in the cold air. He just watched her. His eyes were a pale, flat gray, the color of a frozen lake. He did not look angry. He looked evaluating. The lies came tumbling out, desperate and thin. "My name is Sarah. I was just borrowing him. My father, he is sick, at the Ridge Camp. I had to get to him." The lies sounded pathetic, even to her. The man's gaze flickered down, to where the hem of the cream-colored wedding dress was visible beneath her muddy cloak. His expression did not change. He knew. The lies crumbled, and the raw, terrible truth took their place. Her shoulders slumped. "Please, mister, do not turn me in." Her voice broke. "He will find me, the man I am, the man I am supposed to marry. He will hurt me. I am not a thief, I swear it. I cannot, please." She was begging. She, who had never begged for anything. She hated the sound of her own voice, the weakness in it. She gripped the handle of the small knife in her pocket. She would not be dragged back, not alive. The man, Eli, though she did not know his name, continued to study her. The silence stretched out, taut and cold. The sky in the east was turning a faint, sick yellow. The town would be waking soon. He looked at her, at the horse, at the mountains looming over them. He seemed to be weighing something in his mind. Then, his eyes settled back on her, The scarred side of his mouth twitched. "You want to run?" he asked. His voice was low and rough, like stones grinding together. Annabeth could only nod, her throat too tight to speak. He gave a short, almost soundless huff of air. It was not a laugh. It was something colder. A sardonic glint, a flicker of dark amusement, touched his eyes. "Ride me instead." Annabeth recoiled as if he had struck her. The blood rushed to her face, hot with shame and fury, then drained away, leaving her ice cold. The words hung in the air, base and insulting. He was just like them, just like Dre, just like her father. A man who saw her as a thing, an object to be used, to be ridden. She had escaped one monster only to be caught by another, who would barter her freedom for her body. The desperation in her vanished, replaced by a sudden, violent fire. She would die here. She would use the knife on him, or on herself, before she would submit. "You go to hell," she spat, her voice low and shaking. She pulled the knife from her pocket, the small, dull blade looking like a child's toy. She braced herself, for him to laugh, to lunge, to grab her. But he did not move. The strange, ironic glint remained in his eye. He did not even look at the knife. He simply raised his chin, gesturing not at his body, but at his saddled horse. Then he nodded toward the steep, pine-choked ridgeline that led up into the deep wilderness. The realization struck her, sudden and sharp. He did not mean that. He meant him, his path, his escape. Ride with him. Follow him. He was not offering a trade. He was offering a chance, as cold and hard as the morning itself. He seemed to read the understanding on her face. "I am leaving," he said, his voice flat. "Now, you can follow, but you keep up. You do what I say, or I leave you where you stand. Your choice." He gave her no time to answer. He did not offer her a hand. He did not wait to see what she would do. He turned his back on her, a complete, dismissing gesture. He unhitched his horse, swung up into the saddle in one fluid, economical motion, and nudged the horse's flanks. He began to ride out of the alley, his spare mount trotting behind on its lead. Annabeth stood frozen for one single heartbeat. She heard a door slam somewhere in the town. A man shouted. The smell of baking bread was on the air. Dre, the saloon, the wedding dress, the cold stranger. It was no choice at all. She ran. She plunged through the mud, her cloak flying open, the satin dress flashing in the dawn light. "Wait!" He did not stop, did not even look back. She reached the spare horse, grabbed the saddle horn, and tried to pull herself up. Her foot slipped. The dress was too long, the horse too tall. She scrambled, clumsy and desperate, shoving her foot into the stirrup, hiking the heavy satin and wool up around her knees, and hauled herself across the saddle. She landed sideways, breathless. The man, Eli, clicked his tongue, and his horse moved from a walk to a ground-eating trot. Annabeth grabbed the horse's mane, her heart leaping into her throat as they left the alley and crossed the open space at the edge of town. No one saw them. They moved past the last cabin, past the sleeping assay office, and were at the base of the mountains in moments. The horse began to climb. He did not take the switchback trail. He urged his mount straight up the slope, through thickets of juniper and scrub pine, his horse finding footing where Annabeth could see none. Her own horse followed, its muscles straining. The cold was immediate. As they gained elevation, the wind came rushing down from the peaks, a living thing with teeth. It cut through her cloak and the thin satin as if she were naked. Her hands, gripping the mane, were numb in minutes. The silk of the wedding dress felt like a sheet of ice against her skin. She was bounced and jolted. The saddle leather was hard, and she was riding poorly, but she did not dare complain. She just held on, her teeth chattering so hard she thought they would break. They rode all day. He did not speak. He did not look back. He just moved, a relentless, silent figure, deeper and higher into the Bitterroot Range. The landscape changed from pine forest to sheer rock faces and stands of skeletal aspen. The world became vast, empty, and terrifying. The town vanished. The valley vanished. And there was nothing but the gray sky, the biting wind, and the silent, scarred man in front of her. When the light finally began to fail, turning the snow-dusted peaks a pale, deathly blue, he finally stopped. He had chosen a place sheltered from the wind, a dense stand of ancient pines that formed a small clearing. He swung down from his horse. Annabeth tried to dismount. Her legs, frozen and cramped, would not obey. She half fell, half slid from the saddle, collapsing onto the bed of pine needles. She could not feel her feet. The shivering was so violent, it was like a seizure. The man ignored her. He moved with a swift, practiced efficiency. He unsaddled both horses, rubbed them down with a bundle of dry grass, and tethered them where they could forage. Then he built a fire. He used a flint and steel, and within minutes, a small, hot flame was crackling. Eating the dry pine twigs, he fed it. He pushed a small canvas sack toward her. Inside was a piece of hardtack and a strip of dried venison, so tough it hurt her jaw to chew. She ate it crouched by the fire, the smoke stinging her eyes, the heat scorching her face while her back remained locked in ice. The wedding dress was a ruin. It was torn from the ride, smeared with mud and horse sweat. It was a joke, a tragic, ridiculous joke. She had to know. She had followed this man into nowhere, and she did not even know his name. She waited until he was done checking his horse's hooves. He sat on the other side of the fire, staring into it, his face hard and unreadable in the flickering light. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was a hoarse croak. He did not look up. He continued to feed small sticks into the blaze. "Why did you help me?" she pressed, her voice a little stronger. You could have left me, or turned me in. Why?" He stopped. He held a stick poised over the flames. He did not look at her. He looked past her, into the deep, black woods, and then his gaze dropped back to the fire. The flames danced in his pale eyes. Annabeth waited. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the mournful, lonely call of an owl, far up the ridge. He did not answer. He tossed the stick into the fire, watching the sparks fly up into the darkness. His silence was an answer in itself. It said her question did not matter. It said he had his own reasons, and they had nothing to do with her. He unrolled his bedroll, a single thick layer of wool and canvas, and placed it on the far side of the fire. Annabeth's heart gave a single, heavy thud. Now, this was the price. She had been a fool to think otherwise. He pointed to a spot on her side of the fire, a relatively clear patch of pine needles. "Sleep there." He did not look at her again. He got into his bedroll, pulled it up to his shoulders, and turned his back to her. Within a minute, his breathing was deep and even. He was either asleep or pretending to be. She was stunned. There was relief, so sharp it made her dizzy, but it was followed by a wave of confusion, and then just the cold. The fire was warm, but only on one side. She huddled as close as she dared, tucking her frozen feet under the hem of the ruined dress and pulling the damp cloak tight. Sleep was impossible. She was no longer a piece of property waiting to be claimed, but she was something else now, lost, adrift, and completely at the mercy of the silent man who had saved her. The forest, which had been quiet, now seemed alive. Every snap of a twig made her jerk. Was it a wolf, a bear? Was it Dre's men? Could they have followed? The wind moaned through the high branches, sounding like a woman weeping. She flinched, a small, uncontrollable spasm that shook her whole body. She squeezed her eyes shut, pressing her face against her knees. She heard a sound, the crunch of the bedroll, the soft tread of a boot on the needle-covered earth. She held her breath. He was getting up. A shadow fell over her. She kept her eyes clamped shut. This was it. He had changed his mind. Something heavy and surprisingly warm landed on her, covering her from her shoulders to her feet. It was thick and coarse, and it smelled of horse and smoke and leather. She opened her eyes. He was standing over her, a dark silhouette against the dying fire. He had thrown his heavy saddle blanket over her. He looked down at her for a moment, his face in shadow. He said nothing, not one word. Then he turned, went back to his bedroll, and lay down, his back to her once more. Annabeth stared at the rigid, silent shape of the man. She slowly, cautiously, pulled the rough wool blanket up to her chin. It was the warmest thing she had ever felt. It was not kindness, she told herself. It was practical. A man traveling in the mountains could not have his companion freeze to death on the first night. It was an act of preservation, not rescue. But it was warmth. And as she finally, blessedly, felt the violent shivering begin to subside, she watched the man's back and wondered what ghosts he was running from, and how long she could possibly survive riding with them. The next morning, Eli was packed and saddling the horses before the sun had cleared the eastern ridgeline. He did not wake her gently. He nudged her boot with his, "Get up! The wind is shifting. We have to be over the pass before noon." Annabeth scrambled to her feet, her body a single, unified ache. She was stiff from the cold and from riding, but the saddle blanket had saved her from the worst of the chill. She folded it as neatly as her numb fingers would allow and placed it by his pack. He merely grunted, taking it and tying it down without a word of acknowledgement. He tossed her another piece of dried venison. "Eat while you can." They did not ride. They climbed. The trail became a memory, a faint suggestion of a path used by game animals and perhaps, long ago, by hunting parties. Eli led them up sheer rock faces, along ledges so narrow Annabeth had to close her eyes and trust the horse beneath her. He seemed to know the mountains, as if he had memorized them in the dark. For 3 days, they pushed deeper into the Bitterroot backcountry. The air grew thinner, the world quieter. The only sounds were the crunch of the horse's hooves in the gathering snow, the sharp cry of a hawk overhead, and the constant, high, lonesome moan of the wind. They crossed crumbling log bridges laid over chasms so deep the bottom was lost in shadow. Annabeth watched the rotted wood bend under the weight of Eli's horse, then held her breath as she followed, the sound of the rushing water below a deafening roar. With every mile, Annabeth felt herself changing. The mountains were a harsh and violent anvil, and they were hammering her into something new. The fear of Lemuel Dre, which had been a hot, suffocating thing, was cooling into a dull, distant dread. It was being replaced by more immediate, sharper fears. The fear of slipping, of freezing, of starving. She was also shedding layers, both physical and emotional. The wedding dress was the first to go, in pieces. The long, heavy skirt, already torn, became a constant liability. It snagged on branches. It tangled in her legs when she dismounted. On the second day, while stopped at a high creek to water the horses, she took the small, dull knife from her pocket. Eli watched her, his flat gray eyes betraying nothing. He was refilling their canteens, his movements economical. Annabeth sawed at the heavy satin, just below her knees. The fabric was tough. The knife was not. It was a laborious, clumsy process. She hacked and tore, her breath pluming in the air, until she had freed herself from the worst of it. The bottom half of the dress, the muddy, ice-caked hem, she left on the rocks, a strange, pale flag in the middle of nowhere. It felt good. It felt like a burial. The silence between them was as vast as the landscape. It was not a comfortable silence. It was a shared isolation. He was a man who lived entirely inside himself, and he forced her to do the same. But on the third night, huddled by a fire that offered more smoke than heat, the quiet became too much. "You never told me your name," she said. He was cleaning his revolver, a task he performed with ritualistic focus. He did not look up. Eli.
Just Eli?
It is enough. He slotted the cylinder back into the frame with a solid, metallic click. My name is not Sarah, she said. The fire popped, sending a small ember onto the snow. It is Annabeth Colton. He gave a slight nod, as if confirming something he already knew. Colton, the drunkard at the Gold Nugget. Your father. Shame washed over her, hot and quick. Yes, she felt the need to explain, to make him see that she was not just the daughter of a weak man, not just a bartered bride. He was not always like that. Before my mother died, before the claim went bad, he used to be different. Eli set the revolver aside and stared into the fire. Everyone used to be different. His finality shut her down. But the next day, as they navigated a field of snow-choked boulders, she found her voice again. I was supposed to be a teacher. I had a letter from a school in Oregon. But my father, he needed me, or so he said. He needed someone to cook for him, to clean, to keep his creditors from the door. Eli kept his horse moving. You talk too much. And you do not talk at all, she retorted, a flicker of her old spirit rising. It makes a person wonder. What are you doing out here, Eli? You're not a prospector. You're not a trapper. You carry no furs. You do not even carry a pick. I am riding, he said, his voice clipped. You are running, she said, and she knew it was the truth. Just like me. He stopped his horse so abruptly that her own mount nearly collided with his. He turned in the saddle, and for the first time, she saw a genuine cold anger flash in his eyes. The scar on his face seemed to pull tighter. You know nothing about me, girl. You wanted a ride out of that town? You got it. Do not push your luck. He turned and spurred his horse forward, leaving her behind in the snow. But she had seen something, in the way he turned, in the way he favored his left side. She had noticed it before. He always dismounted on his right, a clumsy, unnatural movement for a horseman. He never reached for anything high with his left arm, and that night, when he thought she was asleep, she saw him by the fire, his jacket off, rubbing a salve from a small tin onto his back. His back was a road map of old injuries. She saw the pale, puckered circles of at least 2 old bullet scars, healed but stark white against the weathered skin of his shoulder. He was a man who had been shot, more than once, and from behind. The next day, the weather turned, the sky lowered, turning a heavy, uniform white, and the snow began to fall. Not in gentle flakes, to in a hard, horizontal drive. The wind howled, a physical force that tried to peel them from the saddles. Eli's face, what she could see of it under his hat, was grim. We cannot stay on the ridge, he yelled over the storm. There is a place, a hunter's cabin. We can shelter there, if we can reach it. He led them down into a small, timbered canyon, a place so hidden Annabeth was certain they would be lost. But after an hour of pushing through snowdrifts that came up to the horses' chests, a shape emerged from the white curtain. It was a small, crude cabin, built of logs and half dug into the hillside, barely more than a hovel. But it was shelter. Eli kicked the frozen door open. The inside was dark and smelled of dry rot, cold ash, and animals. It was a single room. In one corner was a rough wooden frame that might have been a bed. In the center was a stone fire pit, the chimney a hole in the roof. While Eli saw to the horses, tucking them into a small lean-to behind the cabin, Annabeth swept the packed dirt floor with a bundle of dried pine boughs. She was exhausted, her fingers and toes numb, but she was grateful. When he returned, stamping the snow from his boots, he lit a fire. The small room filled with smoke, then slowly, miraculously, began to hold a vague, smoky warmth. This is your place? She asked, huddling near the flames. No, it belonged to an old trapper. He died 2 winters back. Eli was looking at the far wall, at a dark space beside the empty bed frame. Annabeth moved closer. It was not just shadow. Something was carved into the logs. It was a map. It was not a map of settlements or roads. It was a map of the high country, crude, but detailed. It showed ridges, river forks, passes, and strange, small symbols. It covered half the wall, etched deep into the wood with a knife. Eli reached out, his gloved fingers tracing a line that led west, over a series of jagged peaks. He touched it with a strange familiarity, as if he were reading a letter he had read 100 times before. "You know this map," she said. It was not a question. Eli's hand dropped from the wall. He turned back to the fire. "I knew the man who drew it." "The trapper?" "Before him," he sat on his heels, adding a larger piece of wood to the fire. The storm outside was a deafening roar, a monster trying to get in. The wind shrieked through the cracks in the logs. "Who are you, Eli?" she asked, her voice quiet. He was silent for a long time. The firelight played on his scarred face, making the shadows jump. He looked older than he had in the alley. He looked like a man who had not slept soundly in years. "It does not matter," he said. "It matters to me," Annabeth insisted. "I have followed you into this. I have trusted you with my life. I deserve to know who I am trusting." He looked at her, his gray eyes seeming to weigh her, to measure her strength. Finally, he spoke. "I used to ride for the United States Marshals," he said, his voice low, the words pulling from him like teeth. "Out of the Dakota Territory." Annabeth stared. A marshal, a lawman. It was the last thing she would have guessed. "What happened?" she whispered. "I was good at it," he said, his gaze distant, fixed on the memory. "I was good at tracking. I was good at finishing things. I always brought my man in, one way or another." He picked up a stick, poking at the fire. "There was a man, a cattle baron's son, young, vicious. He and his friends had hurt a girl, a settler's daughter. They left her for dead, but she was not dead. She told me who it was." Eli's jaw tightened, the muscles flexing under the skin. "I was sent to bring him in, not to kill him, just to bring him in. His father was a powerful man. He had judges in his pocket. He had politicians. He wanted his boy brought back for a trial that would be a farce. So I went. I found him at a saloon, just like the one in that town. He was drunk, bragging." Eli paused. The fire crackled. "He pulled on me," Eli said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "He was fast, but I was faster. I did not mean to kill him. The bullet, it went high." He touched his own chest, just below the collarbone. "But it was enough. He was dead before he hit the floor." "It was self-defense," Annabeth said. "You were a marshal." "His father did not see it that way," Eli said, a cold, bitter irony in his tone. "To him, I was a murderer. He put a price on my head, not a legal one, a private one. He sent men, 3 of them. They found me on the trail. They shot me in the back." Annabeth flinched, remembering the pale, round scars. "I got away, but I knew I could not go back. The badge was useless. The man's money ran too deep. A jury would have hanged me. So I ran. I became a ghost. I have been a ghost for 3 years." He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "That is who you are riding with. Annabeth, a wanted man, a killer. There is a $500 reward for the man who brings me in, dead or alive, or..." The cabin was silent, save for the storm. Annabeth absorbed his words. A lawman who had fled justice, a man hunted, just as she was. Their bond, she realized, was not just circumstance. It was rooted in something deeper. They were both exiles. "So you came here," she said, looking at the map. "To this place you knew." "I ride the high country. I stay away from towns. I do my business, and I move on. No one is looking for a ghost in a blizzard. Suddenly, he stiffened. His head snapped up.
What is it?
Annabeth whispered, her heart seizing. Quiet. He rose, silent as smoke, and moved to the cabin's single, tiny window, a square cut in the logs and covered with a piece of greased parchment. He nudged the parchment aside with the barrel of his revolver. He stared out into the swirling snow for a full minute. Annabeth held her breath. What did you see? Nothing. I thought just the wind. But he did not relax. He stayed by the window, a taut, dangerous silhouette. Hours passed. The storm raged. Eli finally moved from the window, but he did not sit. He paced the small cabin, 2 steps one way, 2 steps the other. He was a caged animal. They will not find us in this, Annabeth said, trying to reassure herself as much as him. No one could track us in this. Dre's men are not trappers, Eli said, his voice grim. But they are not fools. They will know we went into the mountains, and they will follow the passes. This storm, it will not last forever. Night fell. The storm did not abate. They ate the last of the venison and a handful of nuts Eli had in his pack. The cabin was cold. The fire a small point of light in a vast, howling darkness. Annabeth wrapped herself in her cloak and the ruined wedding dress. Eli sat against the wall, his revolver in his lap, his eyes open, staring at the door. Annabeth could not sleep. His confession had changed everything. He was not just a grim stranger. He was a man in deep, mortal trouble. He was a man who had killed, even if he was justified. He had brought her up here to save her, but in doing so, he had brought her into his own danger. And if Dre's men found them, they would not ask questions. They would see a wanted man and a runaway woman. They would kill Eli for the bounty and drag her back to Dre. A new, terrible thought took root. She was endangering him. By staying with him, she was putting his life at risk. He was a ghost, and he had survived by being alone. Now he was not alone. He had her, a liability. She watched him. He had not moved in an hour. His eyes were closed, but she knew he was not asleep. His breathing was too controlled. She waited. She let the hours crawl by, until the fire was nothing but a bed of glowing red embers, and the sound of the wind had dropped to a low, mournful sigh. The storm was passing. She had to leave. If she left now, while he slept, she could be gone by dawn. She could head down the canyon, away from the pass Eli was watching. She would leave tracks, but they would be her tracks. Dre's men would follow her. They would leave Eli alone. It was a terrible, stupid plan. She had no food, no weapon but her small, dull knife. She would likely freeze to death or be caught within a day. But it was the only thing she could think of. She could not be the reason he was caught. She could not be the reason he was killed. She rose, slowly, soundlessly. Her joints cracked, but the wind covered the noise. She gathered her cloak around her. She did not have boots, only the thin leather shoes she had worn from the saloon, now stiff and frozen. She did not care. She took one step toward the door. "Do not," his voice, soft and lethal, came out of the darkness. She froze. He was on his feet, a shadow detaching itself from the wall. He was between her and the door before she could even turn. "I saw them," he said, his voice a low rasp. "Just before the dark set in, on the far ridge, 3 riders. They were not close, but they were looking. They saw the smoke from the chimney before the snow got thick." Annabeth's blood ran cold. "Dre's men." "Or mine. It does not matter. They are here." "Then you have to go," she whispered, frantic. "Leave me. You can move faster. I will slow them down. I will tell them I stole your horse, that you went east. I will." "Stop," he commanded. "I am endangering you. Eli, they are here because of me. I will not have you shot in the back again. Not for me." "You think I do not know that?" he said, his voice rough. You think I have not been thinking that for the last 2 days? I should have left you in that alley.
Then let me go now.
She tried to push past him. He grabbed her. His hands closed on her upper arms, and his grip was like iron. He did not hurt her, but he held her immobile, his face inches from hers in the dying light of the fire. "And where will you go, Annabeth?" he snarled. "You will die out there. You will freeze before you have gone a mile. Is that what you want? You run from Dre just to give yourself to the mountains. It is better than being caught. It is better than getting you killed." "You think I brought you up here just to let you vanish?" he said, his voice low and intense, a raw, coiled fury in it. He gave her a small shake. "You think I have spent 3 days keeping you alive just to watch you walk out into a blizzard?" I do not know what you—" She could not finish. His mouth was on hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was hard and cold and desperate. It was like the mountains, like the storm. It was full of a fury and a loneliness so deep it shocked her to her core. It was the kiss of a man who had forgotten what it felt like to touch another human being. It was brutal, and it was aching, and it was not a violation. Annabeth's first instinct, trained by years of fending off drunks and guarding herself, was to fight, to push him away, to bring her knee up. But his hands were not cruel. They were holding her, anchoring her, and his mouth, it was not taking, it was asking, or demanding, or perhaps it was just a raw, unthinking reflex. She did not know what it was, but she knew that for the first time in her entire life. She was not recoiling. She did not feel owned. She felt found. Her hands, which had come up to push him away, stopped. They hesitated. Then, slowly, they clutched the rough wool of his jacket. She leaned into him. She leaned into the kiss, into the warmth and the danger and the solid, living presence of him. She kissed him back, with all the fear and exhaustion and pent-up desperation of her entire life. He broke the kiss as abruptly as he had started it. He let her go, stepping back, and the cold air rushed in between them. They stared at each other in the darkness. Both of them were breathing hard, their breath pluming in the frigid air of the cabin. Annabeth's lips burned. Eli turned away from her, running a hand over his face. He looked like a man who had just been struck. "Get some sleep," he growled, his back to her. He did not sound angry. He sounded shaken. "Eli, we have to ride at first light. Before they do, get some sleep." He did not go back to his spot against the wall. He went to the door, opened it a crack, and stood there, staring out into the newly silent, snow-covered night, his revolver in his hand. Annabeth retreated to her side of the cabin. She lay down, pulling her cloak around her. But she did not sleep. She was trembling. But it was not from the cold. It was from something else. Something new and terrifying and powerful. Something that had woken up inside her. She lay there in the dark, watching the rigid, unmoving back of the man guarding the door. They were trapped in a tiny cabin, with hunters on their trail. And yet, she had never felt more alive. They lay side by side in the darkness, but not touching, fully clothed, and shivering with the unspoken thing that had just passed between them. It was a promise of warmth, more dangerous than any winter. The morning broke cold and sharp. The kiss, or whatever it had been, hung in the frigid air of the cabin, unmentioned and heavy as a shroud. Eli was already by the door, his back to her, checking the load in his revolver. He had not slept. Neither had she. "They are moving," he said, his voice flat, all traces of the previous night's emotion gone, buried under layers of ice. "They are on the ridge, fanning out. They found the cabin, or they are about to—" Annabeth scrambled to her feet, her body stiff. The fear was back, a cold knot in her stomach. "What do we do?" "We ride, hard. They will have to come down into the canyon to get to us. We use the time they lose." He turned, and his eyes were the color of the sky before a snowstorm, pale, cold, and unreadable. He did not look at her lips. He did not acknowledge her as the woman he had held. He looked at her as a liability he had to move. "Can you ride?" She nodded, her throat tight. They did not bother with the fire. They were out the door in a minute, the horses snorting plumes of white vapor in the sharp air. Eli kicked snow over the ashes in the fire pit, a cursory, hopeless gesture. He swung into his saddle and did not wait for her. They ran. They pushed the horses down the far side of the canyon, not following a trail, but a line of instinct only Eli seemed to possess. They plunged through deep snowdrifts, slid down shale slopes, and forced their way through thickets of frozen alder that whipped their faces and tore at their clothes. For 2 days, they did not stop for more than an hour at a time. The pursuit was relentless. Twice, they saw the riders, high above them, moving parallel, trying to cut them off at a pass. But Eli knew the mountains better. He would turn, backtracking into a box canyon that had a hidden exit, a narrow game trail up the back wall, or ride straight up a frozen creek bed, the horse's iron-shod hooves striking sparks on the blue ice. He was a master of this land. He was the ghost he claimed to be. Annabeth was just a shadow, clinging to his wake. On the 3rd day after the cabin, the supplies ran out. The last of the nuts was gone. The small bag of dried meat was empty. The hunger, which had been a dull ache, became a sharp, clawing presence. It made her dizzy. It made her weak. The horses, too, were suffering, pawing weakly at the snow for any trace of cured grass. That night, they camped in a hollowed-out space beneath a massive fallen pine, a shelter barely large to fit them and the saddles. The horses stood huddled nearby, their heads low. "We cannot run anymore," Annabeth whispered, her voice hoarse. "The horses, they are done." "They will rest tonight," Eli said. He was staring into the darkness, his face a grim mask. "Tomorrow, we eat, then we move." The next morning, he was gone when she woke. Panic seized her, a raw, childlike terror. He had left her. He had finally decided she was too much trouble. She stumbled out of the shelter, calling his name. He emerged from the trees, silent as the snow. He was holding a snare made of thin wire from his pack. He did not acknowledge her shout. "Go back. Be quiet." She watched him. He moved with a predator's patience. He found a rabbit run, a small tunnel in the snow, and set the snare with meticulous care, dusting it with fresh snow to hide his scent. Then he came back to her. "Now you—" He handed her the revolver. She looked at it, then at him. "What?" "You are a fast learner. You learn to ride in a day. You will learn this in an hour." His voice was harsh. "I cannot be the only one with a gun. If they come, I cannot be everywhere. You need to be able to protect yourself, or protect me." The weight of the gun was heavy, a solid, cold reality in her hand. It was an evil thing. I cannot," she whispered. "I have never—" "Yes, you can." He took a small tin of cartridges from his coat. "You can, or you will die here. It is that simple." He was brutal. He was right. He stood her facing a dead tree, a dark slash of bark against the white. "Hold it with both hands. Your arms straight. Do not aim. Just point. Feel where it is pointing." He stood behind her. His hands covered hers, adjusting her grip. His touch was impersonal, practical, and yet it sent a jolt through her, a memory of the kiss in the dark. "You do not pull the trigger," he said, his voice low by her ear. "You squeeze it, slow, like you are squeezing a lemon. Let it surprise you." She took a breath. The air was so cold it burned. She squeezed. The explosion was deafening. It shattered the silence of the mountains. The gun kicked in her hands, a violent, living thing, and the smell of sulfur and black powder stung her nose. She had flinched. Closing her eyes, the shot went wide. hitting the snow a yard to the left. "Again," he commanded.
But the noise,
She said, her ears ringing.
the riders.
"They are too far. Or they are not. It does not matter. A gunshot is a gunshot. It is better they hear one now, while we are ready, than when they are on top of us. Again." She loaded another cartridge, her fingers clumsy. She raised the gun, squeezed, closer this time. Again. She shot until the cylinder was empty. On the fifth shot, she hit the tree, sending a chip of bark flying. "Good," he grunted. He gave her 5 more cartridges. "Load it. Keep it. Do not use it unless you mean to. A gun is not a threat. It is a promise." He went to check his snare. Annabeth stood alone, the heavy revolver in her hand. She had crossed another line. An hour later, he returned, a rabbit dangling from his hand. It was limp, its dark eyes still open. He brought it to the fire. He unsheathed his knife.
You will learn this too.
He showed her how to skin it, how to dress it. The work was bloody, precise, and necessary. She did not look away. She watched his hands, the sure, economical movements. He had done this hundreds of times. When he was done, he handed her the knife. "Your turn to learn." He had snared another. She did it. Her hands shook, and the work was clumsy, but she did it. She did not weep. She was too hungry, too cold. She was becoming someone she did not recognize, someone harder, someone who could survive. They ate, the meat hot and fresh, and it was the best thing she had ever tasted. That day, they began to move again, but slower, conserving the horses, and Annabeth's identity continued to shed. The wedding dress was a constant, cold torment. The satin was frozen stiff. The lace at her throat was a circlet of ice. It was the last piece of Annabeth Colton, the bartered bride. That evening, as Eli tended the horses, she sat by the fire. She took out the small knife. She began to cut. She did not hack at it this time. She worked with the same precision Eli had used on the rabbit. She cut the seams of the bodice, peeling the heavy satin away from the wool shift she wore underneath. She cut the lace from the collar. She was left in the simple brown wool shift, which was at least functional, and her heavy cloak. She looked at the pile of ruined satin. It was a ghost, a symbol of her powerlessness. She took the small, delicate lace from the collar and held it to the fire. It caught instantly, flaring up in a bright, hot flash before turning to black ash. It was a good fire starter. The rest of the dress, the heavy satin and its silk lining, she did not burn. She began to tear it into long, thin strips. She thought of the bullet scars on Eli's back. "Bandages," she said to herself. Eli had returned, standing in the shadows, watching her. He saw her. Not a bride, but a woman in a simple wool shift, her face smudged with soot, her hands busy with a practical task. He saw her repurpose the symbol of her bondage into a tool for survival. He said nothing, but his eyes lingered on her, a new awareness in them. They were trapped. The weather, which had cleared, turned on them again. The sky grew dark. The wind rose to a shriek, and a full-blown blizzard descended. It was not snow. It was a wall of white. "We cannot stay in the open," Eli yelled over the wind. The horses were turning in panicked circles.
"The horses will freeze! We will freeze!"
"Where?" she screamed back, the wind ripping the word from her mouth. "There," he pointed, not at the trees, but at the rock face of the canyon. "I saw it years ago. A cave, if I can find it." He grabbed the lead of her horse and dragged her through the whiteout. The world vanished. There was only the howling wind and the back of his horse, a dark shape in the swirling snow. He found it. It was not a cabin. It was a hole, a low, dark opening in the rock, blasted open by wind or water, barely tall enough to stand in, but it was out of the wind. They unsaddled the frantic horses and pushed them into the back of the cave, which opened up slightly. The animal's warmth and presence was a small comfort. Eli and Annabeth retreated to the mouth. It was too small for a fire. The wind too fierce. It would suck the smoke and the heat right out. "No fire," he said, his voice grim. "We wait. We share warmth." He laid down his bedroll and the saddle blanket in the driest spot he could find, a shallow depression in the rock floor. He sat, his back to the wall. "Sit." She sat beside him. The cold was overwhelming, a physical weight. She was already shivering, her teeth chattering. "It is not enough," he said. He unwrapped the bedroll, pulling the heavy wool and canvas over both of them, tucking it in around their feet. He draped the saddle blanket over their shoulders. They were huddled together, side by side, his left arm pressed against her right, his leg against hers. The proximity was absolute. It was far more intimate than the cabin. There was no pretense. It was survival. The storm howled outside. The darkness in the cave was total. There was nothing but the sound of the wind and their own breathing. Hours passed. The cold was a living thing, trying to crawl into the blankets with them. Annabeth shivered, a deep, uncontrollable tremor that shook her to the bone.
"It is so cold,"
she whispered. "I know." Eli's voice came from the darkness beside her. "Do not fight the shivering. It is your body trying to stay alive. Think of the fire." She tried, but the cold and the dark and the proximity to him. It was all too much. The walls she had built, the new, hard person she was trying to become, it all crumbled. The terror she had held at bay, the true, bottomless terror of what she had escaped, came rushing in. She began to tremble, but it was not from the cold. A small, choked sound escaped her. Eli stiffened. "Annabeth?"
He said she fell from a horse,"
she whispered. The words pulled from a place deep inside her. Eli was silent. He did not move. The last girl he married, Mary, her name was Mary, he bought a stone for her. Everyone said it was a tragedy. The words began to pour out of her, a dam breaking in the darkness. "But it was not. It was not a fall. I heard one of the saloon girls, the one who had to wash her for the burial." She was shaking, her voice cracking. He liked to use his fists. He liked to show how strong he was. She was not just bruised, she was broken. The girl said he broke things inside her. Annabeth was gasping for air, the confession tearing out of her. "He told my father he wanted sons. He was angry she was not with child, but the girl, the saloon girl, she said Mary never would have, not after what he did. She said, a woman is not built for that kind of hate." She broke. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders heaving in silent, agonizing sobs. She was not weeping for Mary. She was weeping for herself, for the cold, dark, brutal end that had been waiting for her. Eli did not speak. He did not offer empty words of comfort. He did not say, "It is all right." He was not a man of lies. He just moved, in the dark. She felt his arm, the one pressed against hers, shift. His hand, calloused and scarred, found hers. He did not pat it. He did not stroke it. He just took it. He wrapped his fingers around her hand, his grip firm, solid, an anchor. He held her hand, and he let her talk. She talked until the storm subsided, until the first pale gray light of dawn began to creep into the mouth of the cave. She talked about her mother's death. She talked about her father's weakness, the way he had drunk away their small farm. She talked about the powerlessness, the feeling of being a thing, an object to be sold and used. He just listened. He held her hand, his thumb resting on her pulse, a silent, steady presence in the dark. He let her empty all the poison out until she was exhausted, raw and hollowed out. When the sun was finally up, the storm was gone. The world outside was silent, buried in 3 feet of new snow. Annabeth was quiet. Her voice was gone. She felt empty, but not broken. She turned her head. He was looking at her. His face, in the pale light, was exhausted. The ghost was gone. In its place was just a man who had seen too much, and who had just sat through a confession darker than his own. The emotional intimacy was absolute. It was a bond forged in darkness and terror. It was deeper than any touch. She did not pull her hand away. He did not let go. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He did not tense. He let her. Then, slowly, she lifted her head. She looked at him, at his mouth, at the scar that pulled it. This was her choice. Not a desperate grab in the dark, not a trade, a choice. She was the one who moved. She leaned in, and she touched her lips to his. It was not angry, like the kiss in the cabin. It was not chaste. It was slow and deep and aching. It was a kiss of profound, desperate gratitude. It was a kiss that said, "You are the first person who has ever seen me. You are the first person who has not tried to use me." For a moment, he was perfectly still, and then he responded. A low sound, a groan, came from deep in his chest. His other hand came up, his fingers burying in her tangled hair, holding her head as if she were the only solid thing in the world. He kissed her back, and all the loneliness, all the years of running, all the pain of his own past poured into it. It was heated, and it was aching. It was not about pleasure. It was about connection. It was two broken, hunted things, finding a moment of warmth in a world of ice. They were tangled in the blankets, their cold lips warming against each other. It was a promise, a dangerous one. They finally broke apart, both of them breathing hard. The sun was fully up. The reality of their situation came rushing back in. Eli pulled away first. He stood up, his movement stiff. He was distant again, but it was a different distance. It was not coldness. It was fear. He went to the cave mouth and looked out, his back to her. He was building his walls again. "You should not have done that, Annabeth," he said, his voice rough. "Why not?" she asked, her voice still raw from the night. He turned. His face was hard, the ghost back in place. "Because I am a hunted man. I am a killer. I have nothing. I am riding toward nothing. I told you, you need to find a better man, a safe man." Annabeth looked at him. The girl who had begged in the alley was gone forever. The woman who had confessed in the dark, who had chosen to kiss this man, was here instead. She stood up, her own anger, a clean, hot thing, rising in her. She walked over to him. And she slapped him. The sound was sharp, shocking in the quiet of the cave. Eli stared at her, his hand slowly rising to his cheek. He was not angry, he was stunned. "Better do not mean safer," she said, her voice shaking, but strong. "You think a safe man is what I want? You think Lemuel Dre was not a safe man? He was the richest, most powerful, best man in that valley?" She jabbed a finger at his chest. "I am not looking for safe. Eli, I am done with safe. I am looking for this, for someone who sees. I am not afraid of you. I am not afraid of your past. I am done being afraid." She was breathing hard, her eyes locked on his. He stared at her, a new, strange light in his eyes. He saw her, really saw her, not as a victim, not as a burden, but as an equal, as a fighter. He was about to speak. He opened his mouth. Crack! The sound was sharp, closer than before. A rifle shot. It echoed off the canyon walls, loud and clear in the still, post-storm air. Eli grabbed her, pulling her back from the cave mouth in a single, violent motion. He was no longer her conflicted lover. He was the marshal. "Get the saddles!" he snapped. Now, that was not a warning. That was a hunter. One of them found our tracks. He found the cave. Annabeth's heart hammered against her ribs. The moment of intimacy, of raw, angry truth, was shattered. The world had found them again. The rifle shot was a hammer blow against the silence. It was followed by a yell, a man's voice, distant but clear. "There, in the rocks! I saw him!" Eli did not hesitate. He was no longer the man who had kissed her, nor the man who had been slapped. He was the marshal. He was the ghost. "Saddles!" he commanded, his voice a low, lethal blade. "Leave everything else. Go! Go!" He grabbed his rifle from his saddle scabbard while Annabeth fumbled with the frozen buckles of her own saddle. Her hands were numb. Shaking, the man shouted again, closer this time. Another shot rang out, whining off the rock face above their heads, sending stone chips stinging into the cave. "Run the horses!" Eli shoved her toward her mount. "Get on, now!" She scrambled into the saddle, hauling herself up, her hands raw. Eli was already mounted, his revolver in his hand, his rifle across his lap. He fired 2 shots back toward the ridge, not aiming to hit, but to make them take cover. "Ride, down the creek, do not look back!" He slapped the rump of her horse, and the animal bolted, terrified by the gunfire. Annabeth clung to the mane, her heart in her throat. She plunged out of the cave mouth and down the snowy embankment into the frozen creek bed below. The world was a blur of white snow, blue ice, and dark, skeletal trees. She heard Eli's horse just behind her, his shouts, "Go! Go! Go!" The creek bed was a treacherous path. In places, it was solid, wind-swept ice, where the horses slipped and skated, their hooves striking a terrible, clattering sound. In other places, the ice was thin, breaking under their weight, plunging them knee-deep into freezing, rushing water and slush. Annabeth rode blindly, following the curves of the canyon. She did not look back. She could hear the shouts of their pursuers, but they sounded farther away, muffled by the canyon walls. Eli's plan had worked. It had taken them time to get down from the ridge. But they were coming. For hours, they ran. The small, hidden canyon opened into a wider valley, the creek bed a long, frozen highway. They pushed the horses past their limits, the animal's breath coming in great, ragged, steaming gasps. Annabeth's own lungs burned. The cold was a physical pain, a knife in her chest. She could feel her horse beginning to falter. The animal was stumbling, its pace slowing, but it was Eli's horse that went down first. His mount, the magnificent animal that had carried him so surely, stepped on a sheet of ice. Its foreleg punched through, and with a sickening crack, it went down, screaming. Eli was out of the saddle before it hit the ground, rolling on the ice, coming to his feet in a single, fluid motion. He did not even look at the screaming animal. He looked at Annabeth, then back up the creek. "Get down," he ordered. She slid from her horse, her legs trembling so badly she almost collapsed. Eli ran to his fallen horse. The animal was thrashing, its leg broken, the bone a white spike protruding from the skin. Its screams echoed in the valley. Annabam's hand flew to her mouth.
"We have to... Eli..."
Eli raised his revolver, his face carved from stone, and shot the horse once. Cleanly, between the eyes. The screaming stopped. The silence that fell was shocking, heavier than the gunshot. "They will follow the sound," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. He grabbed the saddlebags from his dead horse, pulling them free. "They will find it. It will buy us time." He ran to her horse, which was standing, head low, exhausted. He slapped its rump. "Go on, get!"
"What?"
Annabeth cried.
"Eli, no, that is our only..."
"It is a lame horse," he snapped, pointing at its foreleg, which was bleeding from a gash from the ice. "It cannot carry 2. It cannot even carry 1. It will only slow us down. Get!" he shouted, waving his arms, and the horse, spooked and weary, trotted away down the creek, leaving them alone. They stood in the middle of a frozen, empty valley. They had no horses. They had one rifle, one revolver, and what was in their saddlebags. The pursuers were coming. "Now what?" she whispered, the terror a cold, hard stone in her stomach. "Now," he said, slinging his rifle over his shoulder and picking up the saddlebags. "We become ghosts." He grabbed her hand. "Come." He did not run back the way they came. He ran toward the canyon wall, a sheer face of dark, snow-dusted rock. Annabeth stumbled after him, her frozen shoes slipping. "Eli, there is no—" "Here," he pointed. At the base of the wall, hidden behind a curtain of frozen waterfall ice, was a dark opening, a hole. It was not a cave. It was the entrance to an old mining tunnel, no taller than a man, shored up with rotting timbers. "In," he said. "They will see our tracks. Look again." He pointed at the ground. They were on a stretch of bare rock, scoured clean of snow by the wind. They had left no tracks for the last 50 yards. "They will follow the horse," he said, his voice a low, grim calculation. "They will find my dead one. They will follow the tracks of your lame one. They will think we are still riding. It will take them hours to figure out we are not. By then, the light will be gone." Annabeth stared at him. The man from the cave, the one who had kissed her, was gone. This was a different man. This was a man who could kill his own horse without flinching, who could abandon another, who could think with a cold, brutal clarity that chilled her to the bone. This calm ruthlessness, it scared her. "Eli." "It is this, or they find us. Get in!" She ducked under the rotting beam and entered the darkness. He followed, pulling a small oil lantern and a tin of matches from his saddlebag. He struck a match, and the small flame illuminated a tiny, dripping, black space. The air was cold, dead, and smelled of wet rock and metal. He lit the lantern, and the flickering yellow light pushed the shadows back a few feet, revealing a narrow tunnel that descended into the blackness of the earth. "We go in deep," he said, "until the light cannot be seen from the mouth." They walked for what felt like an eternity. The tunnel was wet, a constant drip of icy water coming from the ceiling. Their footsteps echoed, hollow and wrong. Annabeth felt the weight of the mountain above her, a crushing, physical presence. She was being buried alive. Finally, Eli stopped. The tunnel opened slightly, into a small chamber where two passages split. A broken pickaxe and a rusted ore cart lay on their side. "Here," he said. He set the lantern down on a flat rock. The small, greasy light cast huge, dancing shadows. He dropped the saddlebags and sank to the ground, his back against the rock wall. The tension, the adrenaline, the iron control, all seemed to drain out of him at once. He closed his eyes, his face pale and exhausted in the lamplight. Annabeth slid down the wall opposite him. The silence was absolute. There was no wind, no cry of a hawk, just the steady, maddening drip, drip, drip of water from the ceiling. They were alive, they were safe, and they were trapped. She looked at him. He was not a ghost. He was just a man, a tired, cold, hunted man. The fear she had felt of his ruthlessness evaporated, replaced by the same aching connection from the cave. She took his bedroll from the saddlebag. It was damp. She unrolled it, spreading it on the driest patch of ground she could find. "You need to rest," she whispered. Her voice sounded too loud in the small space. He opened his eyes. He looked at her, at the meager bed she had made. He nodded. "Once." He lay down. She sat beside him, pulling the saddle blanket over her own shoulders. The cold in the tunnel was a different kind, a damp, penetrating cold that the blankets could not fight. They sat in silence for a long time. "He had a family," Eli said. His voice, so sudden and quiet, made her jump. "What?" "The boy I killed," he said, his eyes open, staring at the dripping ceiling. "The cattle baron's son. He was not a man. He was 19, a boy. Drunk and stupid and vicious, but just a boy. Annabeth watched his face, the muscles working in his jaw. This was the deeper confession, the one that came after the intimacy, after the shared terror. He had a mother, a sister. They were at the funeral. I saw them from a distance. The father, he was all rage, but they just wept. He closed his eyes. I have been a marshal for 10 years. I have killed men who needed killing, but this was different. He pulled on me. It was self-defense. The law says I was clean. His voice dropped to a barely audible whisper. But I have never forgiven myself for killing a boy, for taking a son from a mother, even a bad son. He turned his head, his gaze finding hers in the dim light. That is the man you kissed, Annabeth. Not a hero, not a lawman, a man who shot a boy and ran from his family's grief, a man who has not forgiven himself. Annabeth looked at him, at the raw, festering wound he had just shown her. She understood his self-hatred, the exile he had imposed on himself. He was not just running from the bounty. He was running from this. She moved, crawling onto the bedroll beside him. She did not offer him empty platitudes. She did not tell him he was justified. She did not offer him absolution. She just held him. She wrapped her arms around him, pulling his head against her shoulder, her fingers tangling in his hair. He was stiff at first, his body rigid, surprised. Then, with a long, shuddering sigh, he let go. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her tight, burying his face against her neck, holding on to her as if he were a drowning man. She held him, her own body trembling. She said the only thing that mattered, the only thing that was real. Then do not die running, she whispered into his hair. Do not let that be the end of you. Live, Eli, live with me. He was still for a long time. She felt a tremor run through him. He pulled back, just enough to look at her. His eyes, in the lamplight, were raw, vulnerable. He saw her. He saw her strength, her impossible, stubborn will to live. He did not speak. He just kissed her. It was not the desperate, angry kiss from the cabin. It was not the aching, grateful kiss from the cave. This was slow, intense. It was a promise. It was a man deciding to live. There, in the flickering, greasy lamplight of a forgotten mining tunnel, tangled in damp blankets, with the sound of dripping water and the ghosts of dead miners, they finally made love. It was slow and desperate and quiet. It was not a flight of passion. It was a deliberate act of life. It was two hands reaching for each other in the dark, a confirmation that they were still there, still warm, still breathing. In a world that wanted them dead and cold, it was an anchor in the deepest, darkest part of the earth, a whispered fear and a shared defiance. Afterward, they lay tangled together, his arm heavy across her waist, her head on his chest. The lantern was guttering, the oil almost gone. There is a place, he said, his voice a low rumble against her ear. A settlement, Lakota, a day north of here. If we can cross the high pass, I have friends there. I saved a man's life once. His family owes me a favor. They can hide us. They can give us shelter, at least until the deep winter. No one will follow us there. Annabeth lifted her head. A plan, a real plan. Not just running, a destination. Live with me, she had said, and he had answered her. We can make it, she said. It is treacherous, he warned. The pass, it is narrow, and the weather, it is turning again. She could feel it, even deep in the mine, a change in the air pressure, a deeper cold. Then we leave now, she said, already moving. They dressed in the dying light of the lantern. They packed the little they had. Eli took her hand, his grip strong, and led her back through the blackness, toward the light. When they emerged from the mine, the world was gone. A fresh snow was falling. Not a blizzard, but a thick, steady curtain of white that was already obscuring the landscape. "Good," Eli said. "It will cover our tracks. The pass is this way. Stay close." They began to climb, on foot, heading up the steep canyon wall. It was grueling work. The snow was deep, and the rocks were slick. Annabeth's lungs burned. But she did not complain. She just followed the dark shape of the man in front of her. They had been climbing for an hour when it happened. They were on a narrow ledge, shuffling sideways, when a voice barked from above. "There! It is him! The marshal!" Annabeth looked up. Two men, two dark figures against the gray, swirling snow, were on the ridge above them. They were not Dre's men. These were hard men, bounty men. Eli reacted instantly. He shoved Annabeth flat against the rock wall. "Stay down!" He brought his rifle up, firing in the same motion. The shot was deafening, echoing in the confined space. One of the men screamed and fell forward, tumbling down the rock face, disappearing into the white. The other man fired back. The bullet sparked off the rock, inches from Eli's head. He ducked, pulling Annabeth with him behind a small outcrop. "He is running!" Eli yelled, peering around the rock. The second man was scrambling away, back over the ridge, a wounded animal. "He is gone. The coward!" Eli stood up, breathing hard. "He is just one. He will be back, but not alone. We have to—" He stopped. A strange look crossed his face. He looked down at his own side. "Eli?" Annabeth asked. He swayed. He put a hand out to the rock wall to steady himself. "Eli!" She moved toward him. His hand, when he pulled it away from his jacket, was dark. It was covered in blood. He got me," Eli whispered, a look of grim surprise on his face. He had taken a bullet through the ribs. He slumped against the rock, his rifle clattering to the ledge. "Damn!" The snow was falling faster now, thick and heavy, already beginning to cover the dark stain spreading across his jacket. The world dissolved into a chaos of white snow and echoing gunfire. Eli's dam was a sharp exhalation, a puff of steam in the frigid air. Then he was sliding, his back scraping against the rock face, leaving a dark, wet smear of crimson. Annabeth's panic was a cold, sharp blade in her throat. She looked up. The wounded bounty hunter was gone, vanished over the ridge. Below, the man Eli had shot was a dark, still shape in the snow, already disappearing under the fresh fall. "Eli!" She scrambled to him. He was on the ledge, his eyes squeezed shut, his face pale, beaded with sweat despite the cold. "Through and through," he grunted, his voice tight with pain. It went clean, but it hurts." "We have to move," she said. The voice that came out was not her own. It was cold, calm, and absolute. The girl who had wept in the cave was gone. The woman who had slapped a man for his own self-pity was here. "Give me the knife." He fumbled at his belt. She took it. She looked at the rags of her wedding dress, the bandages she had made. They were in her saddlebag. "No time," she hissed. The snow was falling faster, the wind picking up, howling around the ledge. This was not a storm. It was a blizzard. She took the knife and sliced a long, clean strip from the wool lining of her own cloak. She ripped open his jacket, his shirt. The wound was a raw, blue-lipped hole in his side, just above his hip, welling dark. Slow blood. She pressed the wad of wool against it, hard. He cried out, a sharp, choked sound. "Stay with me, Marshal," she ordered, her voice a snarl. "You are not dying here." She packed the wound, then tore another strip and bound it tight around his ribs. A clumsy, desperate bandage. "Up! Get up!" "I cannot. Annabeth?" "You can." She grabbed his arm, slinging it over her shoulder. "You will." She hauled him to his feet. He was a dead weight, his feet dragging. He was tall, and she was thin, but she was fueled by a glacial rage. She would not let this man die. She would not let the mountains win. "Where?" he gasped, his head lolling.
"The pass, Lakota."
"No," she said. Her mind was racing, clicking with a new, cold clarity. She remembered. She had stared at it for hours. That map carved into the cabin wall. The passes, the creeks, the strange symbols. The trader's post. You remember? On the map. The trapper called it the end of it all. It was south of this pass, down in the valley. It is closer. We can make it. That is a bad place. Annabeth, Silas Croft. He is a jackal. It is shelter. She cut him off. And it is close. She half dragged, half carried him off the ledge, slipping and sliding down the snowy embankment. The blizzard hit them like a fist. The world vanished, becoming a screaming, swirling vortex of white. She could not see 10 feet. The wind stole her breath. But the map was seared into her mind. She knew the shape of the canyon, the way the creek should bend. She put her back to the north wind and headed down, into the valley, into the teeth of the storm. Eli was fading. He was conscious, then not. He mumbled about the boy he had shot, about his horse. Annabeth did not listen. She just moved, one foot, then the next. She was a machine. Her cloak was frozen stiff. Her hair was a helmet of ice. She fell, hauled him up, and fell again. "Ride me instead," she muttered, the words a bitter prayer in the wind. "So I am, you stubborn fool. So live." It took hours. The light began to fail, the white world turning a bruised, terrifying purple, then gray, just as she thought she could not take another step, just as her legs gave out and she fell, dumping Eli into a snowdrift. She smelled it. Smoke. She looked up. Through the swirling snow, not 50 yards away, was a low, dark shape, a sod-roofed building, half buried, with a single, yellow, greasy square of light for a window. A thin plume of smoke was torn from its chimney by the wind. The trader's post. She got up. She pulled Eli from the snow. She dragged him the last 50 yards. She did not knock. She kicked the door open. The room was hot, thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, stale whiskey, and wood smoke. A single, large, bearded man in filthy woolens sat at a table, a bottle in his hand. He looked up, his eyes small and suspicious, as she dragged her cargo into the room. "Shut the door!" The man growled. Annabeth kicked it shut. She hauled Eli toward the stone fireplace, dumping him on the filthy floorboards near the hearth. The man, Silas Croft, stood. He was a bear of a man, his belly hanging over his belt. He looked at Eli, pale and bleeding. He looked at Annabeth, a wild thing of ice and snow. Her clothes, a bizarre collection of torn wool and... was that satin? He saw the remnants of the bridal dress, tattered and ruined, clinging to her. His suspicious eyes narrowed. He looked her up and down. A woman, young, with a strange, educated sound to her voice, dressed like a runaway whore, dragging a shot man in from a blizzard. He put the pieces together in the only way his mind knew how. "Well, now," he said, his voice a low, greasy rumble. "Looks like you found some trouble. Girly." "He needs a doctor," Annabeth said, her teeth chattering. "He needs bandages, whiskey." "He needs a hole in the ground, looks like," Croft said, taking a step closer. "And you need a protector. A man like that." He gestured at Eli. "He cannot protect you now." He smiled, a slow, yellow-toothed smile. "Help ain't free. Not here. A room, medicine, food. It all has a price, specially for your kind." "My kind?" Annabeth repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "I know what you are." He sneered. "Camp follower. Fled your man, or he fled you. Got tangled up with this one." He reached out, his thick fingers grabbing a piece of the torn satin. "Fancy. You cost a lot, I bet." Annabeth did not move. She felt the world slow down. She felt the cold rage from the mountainside crystallize inside her. This man, he was Lemuel Dre. He was her father. He was every man who had ever looked at her and seen a thing to be used. "I can pay," she said. "Oh, I bet you can," he said, stepping closer. "But I do not take coin from the likes of you. You can have the back room. You can clean him up. And you and me, we can settle the bill. And in the morning, I will decide if I feel like telling the law, or whoever is looking for him, that he is here." He was blocking her from Eli. He was blocking her from the fire. He was big, and he was sure of his power. Annabeth looked at Eli, who was shivering, his eyes closed. She looked at the trader, his leering, confident face. The transformation was final. "All right," she said, her voice soft. "Just let me get him comfortable. He is heavy." She bent over Eli, as if to move him. Her hand went to his belt, to the heavy, worn holster. When Silas Croft turned to bar the door, she rose. He turned back, a triumphant look on his face. It vanished. Annabeth was standing, not 5 feet from him. Eli's heavy revolver was in her hand. It was not shaking. It was held with both hands, steady as a rock, aimed directly at the center of his chest. The man who had taught her to shoot had taught her well. What is this?" Croft stammered, his hands coming up. "Now, girlie, do not be foolish." "My name is Annabeth," she said. Her voice was not loud. It was as cold and clean as the ice on the creek. "And you are going to do exactly what I say." Croft stared at the gun, then at her eyes. The woman he thought he saw was gone. This was someone else. This was a killer. "You are going to get me hot water," Annabeth said, "and clean bandages, and a bottle of your best whiskey. You are going to give us that back room. You are going to bring us a hot meal, and then you are going to go back to your table, and you are going to forget we are here. If you come near that door, I will shoot you. If you try to leave, I will shoot you. Do you understand me?" He swallowed, his bravado gone. He nodded mutely. "Now," she commanded, gesturing with the gun. For 2 days, she was the jailer. She tended to Eli, cleaning the wound, forcing broth and whiskey into him. The bullet had missed his lung, just barely. He was weak, he was feverish, but he would live. She sat in a chair by his cot, the revolver in her lap, and watched the door. Silas Croft did as he was told. He was terrified of her. On the 3rd morning, Eli's fever broke. He woke, his eyes clear for the first time. He saw her, the exhaustion in her face, the dark circles under her eyes. He saw the revolver in her lap. He heard Croft moving in the other room, the sound of a man trying to be quiet. He understood. "Annabeth," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "You are all right," she said, the tension draining from her, leaving her weak. "What did you do?" he asked. "I learned the lesson," she said, "the one you taught me. A gun is a promise." He looked at her, at the hard, new lines around her mouth, the survivor's eyes, and he was heartbroken. He had not saved her from Dre. He had just turned her into himself. "You have to go," he said, pushing himself up on one elbow. "Do not be stupid. You cannot even stand." "Not me. You—" He grabbed her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong. "Annabeth, listen to me. I have doomed you, that bounty hunter. He will be back. He will bring others. Dre's men are still out there. This is my life, not yours. You did it. You saved me. Now, go. Take what is left. Go south. Be that teacher." Annabeth looked at him for a long, long time. At the man she had dragged through a blizzard. The man she had held in the darkness of a mine. The man who was trying to save her, even now, from himself. She pulled her wrist free. She stood up. "I am not leaving you," she said. "Annabeth, I am poison. I am a wanted man." They will always come. I will get you killed. Do you understand?
You said ride me instead,
she said, her voice quiet, but shaking with a fierce, unbreakable strength.
In the alley. I thought you meant something else.
But you meant with you. You meant your path, your danger. She leaned down, putting her hands on either side of him on the cot, her face inches from his.
So I am riding with you. Eli, I am not getting off. Not now. Through all of it.
So you can either lie there and feel sorry for yourself, or you can get up and we can finish this. His walls, the last of them, crumbled. He looked at her, and he saw not a victim, not a reflection of his own violence, but a woman, stronger than him, more sure than him. He put his hand on her cheek. All right, he whispered. All right, we finish it. The plan came together, born of their shared desperation. They could not split up, but they could split their pursuers. Dre is looking for me, Annabeth said, and those bounty men are looking for you. We need to make one of them stop. We cannot stop the bounty, Eli said. It is on paper. It is everywhere. But Dre, he is just a man. He is a proud man. He is looking for his property. He is not looking for a dead girl. Eli looked at her. He would need proof. Annabeth looked down at her own clothes, the ruined wool shift, and in the saddlebag, the last remaining scraps of the wedding dress, the strips of satin she had torn for bandages. They were still stained dark brown, with Eli's blood. We give him proof, she said. They left the trading post before dawn on the fourth day. Annabeth paid the terrified Silas Croft with a gold eagle Eli gave her. If you speak of this, she told him at the door, the revolver back in her belt, I will come back. He believed her. They backtracked, Eli weak, leaning on her, but moving. They went back to the canyon where the ambush had happened. They found the ravine where the first bounty hunter had fallen. It was a deep, jagged cut in the earth, the bottom lost in snow and shadow. Annabeth took the blood-stained strips of satin. She tore them, snagging them on the sharp rocks at the ravine's edge, as if a body had tumbled down. Tearing the clothes on the way, she left a single, muddy, torn stocking. It was a gruesome, desperate stage. They will find the dead bounty hunter, Eli said, his voice low. They will find this. They will think you both went over. No, Annabeth said. Dre's men will find this. They will assume I fell, that I am dead. They will not care about the man. They will have their proof. They will go back. Dre's pride will be satisfied. He cannot marry a dead girl. It was a gamble, a long, desperate one, but it was all they had. They turned north. They walked for 2 days, Eli growing stronger, Annabeth guiding them, her mind still holding the memory of the map. They climbed onto the high plateau, a vast, wind-scoured place that felt like the roof of the world. And they saw it. In the distance, a small circle of hide lodges, smoke rising in the clean, cold air, the Lakota settlement. They were met by dogs, then by men with rifles, their faces hard, mistrustful. Eli, weak but standing, spoke a name, Wichapi. Tell her Eli, the man from the rosebud, is here. The name worked a magic. The rifles were lowered. A woman emerged from the largest lodge. She was old, her face a beautiful, powerful map of wrinkles, her hair in 2 gray braids. She looked at Eli, and her dark eyes held no surprise, only a deep, ancient knowing. She nodded once. How, Ghost Walker, you finally came. She took them into her lodge. It was warm, filled with the scent of sage and sweetgrass. She gave them hot broth. She examined Eli's wound, cleaning it with an herbal wash that made him hiss. But her hands were sure. While Eli slept, a deep, healing sleep at last. Wichapi sat with Annabeth by the small fire. She smoked a small pipe, her eyes studying Annabeth in the flickering light. "He is a man who walks between worlds," the old woman said, her English slow and careful. "He belongs to no one. He has a shadow on his soul. The boy he shot." Annabeth nodded, not surprised the woman knew. "You love him," Wichapi stated. It was not a question. "Yes," Annabeth said. The old woman tapped her pipe. "Loving a man like Eli does not save him from his ghosts. It is not so easy. Loving him means you must bear his ghosts. 2. They will sleep in your bed. They will sit at your fire. They are heavy things to carry. You are young. You do not know their weight." Annabeth looked at the sleeping form of the man she had hauled through a blizzard, the man she had held in a mine, the man she had pulled back from the brink of death. She thought of the cold, dark cabin, the feel of his hand in hers, the weight of his own confession. She turned back to the wise old woman. Her eyes were clear. Her voice was steady. "I already do." The winter was long and brutal, a white, howling purgatory. They stayed in the Lakota settlement, protected by Wichapi's grace. Eli's wound healed, leaving a new, puckered scar on his side, a fresh entry in the violent ledger of his skin. Annabeth learned. She learned to bead, to scrape hides, to listen. She learned the weight of the ghosts Wichapi had spoken of, in the deep, frozen nights. Eli would wake with a choked cry, his hands reaching, not for her, but for the boy he had killed. Annabeth would not speak. She would simply take his hand, the one he had held of hers in the cave, and hold it until the shaking stopped, until his breathing evened out. She bore the ghosts, and in bearing them, she found they quieted. When the Chinook winds finally came, carrying the scent of pine and damp, thawing earth, the world broke open. Spring returned to the territory. With the blessing of the Lakota, they moved, not south, not to run, but just down, into the valley of the river, a place sheltered by high ridges, a place no one ever came. They found a ruined homesteader's cabin, the roof caved in, the land fallow. With tools and seed given by the tribe, they began to build. Months passed. The spring deepened into a lush, green summer. The cabin was no longer a ruin. It was a home. It was small, just one room and a lean-to. But the roof was sound, and the chimney drew true. Annabeth had changed. The thin, pale woman from the saloon was gone. Her skin was browned by the sun. Her hair, tied back with a leather thong, was thick and healthy. Her hands were no longer a bride's hands. They were rough, calloused, and capable. She had a garden, a small patch of tenacious green, full of squash, beans, and corn, raised from the seeds Wichapi had given her. She had learned to shoot, not with the frantic desperation of a victim, but with the calm, steady hand of a woman protecting her home. She could hit a running rabbit at 30 yards. She had learned to survive. Eli had changed, too. The ghost walker was receding. The haunted, hunted look in his eyes had softened. One day, Annabeth had taken a pair of shears and cut his hair, trimming away the long, ragged strands of the man who had run, revealing the bones of his face, the scar just a part of him, not the whole. He had started carving. He sat on their small porch in the evenings, a piece of cottonwood in his hand, a knife, and the floor around him would be littered with soft, pale chips. He was carving birds, small animals, his hands sure and patient. And he slept through the night. He had not had a nightmare in over a month. He woke with the sun, his mind clear, his body at rest. He would wake and find her watching him, and he would smile, a true, small, slow smile that was his alone. Their life was quiet. It was hard. It was built on the small, shared moments of survival. Chopping wood, hauling water, mending the small corral they had built. It was a life of work, not of fear. The word came in late July. It was brought by a young Lakota man named Kangi, or Crow, who sometimes rode to the white settlements to trade. He was a friend, and he stopped at their cabin, accepting a cup of water and a piece of Annabeth's cornbread.
"There is news from the mining town," he said, chewing. "The one you came from."
Annabeth, who had been kneeling by her garden, went still. Eli, who was repairing a piece of tack, paused, his hands motionless.
"The land baron," Kangi said. "The one they call Dre. He is dead."
Annabeth's hand, which was resting on the dark earth, clenched. She did not speak.
"He was not a good man,"
Kangi continued, his voice matter-of-fact.
"Even his own men hated him. There was a fire at his ranch. He was in his office, drinking. They say his own foreman, a man he had cheated on wages, locked the door from the outside and lit the match."
A squalid, ugly end. A death not by a hero's bullet, but by the same casual cruelty he had practiced.
"He burned," Kangi said. "The whole ranch burned. The power in that valley is broken. No one is looking for his bride anymore."
Annabeth closed her eyes. She did not feel joy. She did not feel relief. She felt a great, heavy stillness. A line had been drawn. The last chain, the one of pursuit, had just rusted away. The girl who had run from that town, the girl who had been sold, was finally, truly, gone. Eli said nothing. He just watched her, his gaze intense. He watched the final shadow lift from her face. That night, after Kangi had gone, the quiet in the cabin was different. It was heavy, not with peace, but with unspoken decision. The world had just opened up. The primary reason for their hiding was gone. Eli stood by the open door, staring out at the valley, now awash in silver moonlight. He was restless. The news had unsettled him. The habit of running was a deep-cut groove in his soul. "We could go," he said, his back to her. "Now, for real. We could ride south. Oregon, like you wanted. Or California. We could sell this place. Take the horses. Get a new name. I could be someone else. You could be—"
"I am already someone else," she said.
She was sitting at the small table, a single candle lit. She had been working on something for months. In the quiet evenings, it was a quilt. She held it up.
"I am Annabeth,"
she said, her voice soft, but as solid as the rock of the mountains.
"And you are Eli. I am not running from those names. I am not running from this life."
He turned and looked at her, and at the quilt.
It was a history. It was a map of their survival.
It was made of 100 small squares. There were pieces of cream-colored satin, faded and worn. From the wedding dress she had hacked to pieces. There were squares of rough, dark brown wool from the cloak she had worn in her escape. There were pieces of a dark blue, worn-out shirt he had worn, the one that was stained with his blood from the ambush. And in the center, a single, strange square of oiled canvas, a piece from the old map roll he had kept in his saddlebag, the one he had copied from the wall in the trapper's cabin. She had stitched their entire painful story together. The bondage, the escape, the journey, the blood.
"I am done running,"
she said, her hands moving over the different textures.
"I spent my whole life being powerless, being a thing that was moved. I will not be moved again, not by Dre's ghost, not by yours."
She stood and walked to him, holding the quilt. "You do not run from your history, Eli. You do not let it hunt you. You cut it up into pieces and you stitch it back together, into something that can keep you warm." He looked at the quilt, his hand tracing the line of stitching that bound the satin to the wool. He looked at her. He saw the woman who had faced him down in the cave, the woman who had held a revolver on a terrified trader, the woman who had held his hand in the dark. She was not a victim he had rescued. She was an anchor. She was the one who had saved him. "Roots," he said, the word tasting strange and new in his mouth. He had been a ghost for so long. He had forgotten what it meant. "Roots," she confirmed. "Here, in this valley, with you." He did not argue. He just pulled her, and the quilt, into his arms. burying his face in her hair. He had offered her an escape. She had offered him a home. A week later, the wild apple trees on the ridge above their cabin burst into bloom. The scent drifted down to them, sweet and promising. "Come," Eli said, taking her hand. They walked up the ridge, the same ridge they had once seen their pursuers on. Now, it was just a place of beauty. They stood under the clouds of white and pink blossoms, looking down at their small cabin, the green square of their garden, the two horses grazing peacefully in the corral. Eli was quiet. He had been quiet all afternoon, his hands in his pockets. "You have been carving," she said. He always got quiet when he was finishing a piece. "I have," he said. He took his hand from his pocket. He was holding something. He opened his palm. It was a horse, a small, perfectly carved horse, made from a piece of pale, smooth cottonwood. It was captured in mid-stride, its mane flying, a creature of beauty and freedom. It was small enough to fit in her palm. She looked at it, her heart giving a single, hard thump. "Annabeth," he said, his voice rough. "The first time we met, you were trying to steal a horse, to escape." "I remember," she whispered. He took her hand, the calloused, capable hand of a survivor, and he placed the small wooden horse in her palm. "Steal this one," he said, his gray eyes locked on hers, the old sardonic glint gone, replaced by a deep, steady warmth. He closed her fingers around it. "No one will ever chase you again. I swear it." Annabeth looked at the small, perfect gift. It was not a ring of gold, a symbol of ownership. It was a promise of freedom. It was everything. She did not say yes. She did not weep. She smiled. "You are a fool, Eli." She rose on her toes and kissed him. It was not the desperate, angry kiss of the cabin. It was not the aching, grateful kiss of the cave. It was not the passionate, fearful kiss of the mine. It was a kiss of peace. It was slow, and it was sure. It was the taste of apple blossoms and pine smoke in a life that was just beginning. It was no longer hidden. It was no longer hunted. It was just real, and it was earned. Thank you for listening to our story. We would love for you to comment with where you are listening from and connect with other listeners. Please consider subscribing to the Wild West Campfire channel and share your thoughts.